What's the best class for new players to DDO? There are 15 classes and 6 archetypes, making a total of 21 as of 2023. As a rule, you should play what you like. If you played Dungeons and Dragons before and you played a character in that, you can easily play that in Dungeons and Dragons online. If you've never played Dungeons and Dragons, but you have played other video games or MMOs, and so we'll go over each of the different classes, and then we are going to use this neat little tier list to rank them. We're going to recommend right off the bat that you stay away from the archetypes. I know that they probably sound cool, but the archetypes tend to be a little bit more niche. So while you may have experience, say, with Blightcaster from Baldur's Gate 3, if you played that, I would recommend that you stay away from those. You probably would have a better experience on a regular Druid. Arguably, the easiest caster to play. So if you're coming to DDO from another game where you played a caster, you will not be let down by Warlock. Warlocks are definitely the easiest of all the casters to play. Warlocks are spellcasters, and they make a pact with a powerful being from another plane that grants them their power. The damage for Warlock is not that good. They primarily do their damage through something called an Eldritch Blast, which is magical damage. But those magical attacks don't consume spell points, so they can just do them unlimited. So basically, you have an unlimited offense. If you're used to playing melee, if you're used to playing ranged, then Warlock as a caster would be a good fit for you. They have a variety of spells that they can cast, but limited offensive magic. They get a lot of buffing, crowd control, and utility spells. Their primary attribute is normally charisma, which determines their spell effects and maximum spell points. My pick for this for a new player is going to be right in the middle. I think it's definitely a great choice. Okay, next up on the list is Favored Soul. Favored Soul is locked, and it must be unlocked. New players will not have access to Favored Souls. They either have to purchase it in the DDO store or unlock it on the server by getting, I believe it's 2,500 favor on a character. They are divine casters, so they use divine magic. They are similar to clerics, except they do not get to pray for new spells. They cannot swap out spells. They get fewer spells than clerics. They get a select specific few, sort of similar to sorcerers. You cannot change those spells once you select them unless you pay platinum or use a dragon blood potion. You get almost double the spell points of a cleric, though, as a Favored Soul. So where they make up for quantity of spells, they get the quality because they can just cast them over and over and over again. You also, as a Favored Soul, gain inherent energy resistance, and you get an inherent damage reduction as you level up. You can wear light and medium armor. That's it. You cannot wear heavy armor unless you take a feat. You gain the use of weapons based on your holy weapon, and you get to select a deity which would imbue your weapon. You tend to be, as a Favored Soul, they tend to be much more focused on DPS casting. Most Favored Souls that you run into will be DPS casters. You can also make a healer, and you could also make a somewhat tanky Favored Soul. You could make a melee as well. There is a war tree that you could go up. Favored Souls are unique in the sense that you can select whether or not you want to be wisdom based or whether or not you want to be charisma based, and this would be a decision based on if you decided to multi-class or if you decided that you wanted to go after a specific gear set. Charisma gear is a little bit easier to get than wisdom gear. Also, if you did charisma, you would have a bonus on allure skills like diplomacy, intimidate, and barter and bluff. And then also with Charisma, you would have a bonus towards Use Magic Device, which is a great skill in DDO that allows you to use arcane magical items as a divine caster. In my opinion, is one of the more difficult classes to play in DDO, so we are going to put this one as a D tier. The next class up is the Alchemist. Alchemist can be purchased. This is also not a class that a new player would have access to without purchasing it, or unless they buy it with DDO store points, or it is a class that is free to VIP accounts, I believe. Alchemists are masters of potions. They throw vials of potions. They are mostly DPS, although you can heal on an Alchemist. You wouldn't really tank because they cannot wear any armor. They have to wear cloth. They excel at simple weapons, so you can do thrown weapons as well. You can do like a bow and arrow. You could do like a crossbow, or a throwing dagger, or a throwing dart, or a throwing star. They're pretty versatile. They can heal really well. They have a wide variety of spells. They deal really good magical damage. They have some of the best CCs in the game. They have lots of special abilities, like you get gold breath and you can turn things into solid gold. Their main stat is intelligence. Because they need to be purchased or can only be played by VIPs, and the fact that they are sort of a very niche and not very well represented, they're not played very often, but they are very good. But it would be more difficult to play for a new player. I would recommend a new player stays away from this. Stay away from Alchemist. The next up is a wizard. Wizards are very popular in Dungeons & Dragons Online. They're adaptive, they're versatile, they gain extra feats when they level up that allow them to put meta magics on their spell cast. They have spellbook. You can scribe spells that you find on scrolls into your spellbook. Wizards usually focus on things like crowd control, charm, debuffing, DPS, DC casting, things like Finger of Death and Phantasmal Killer, as opposed to straight up damage spells, because while you can do DPS on a wizard by spamming damage spells, you don't have as much mana as a sorcerer. So you are better off at utility, you're better off at things like insta-kill spells. Your main attribute is intelligence, obviously, so that pairs up well with other classes that are intelligence-based. They do require a bit of an economy because you have to buy and scribe spells, and it's not always evident which spells are the best to take. Sometimes there's a little bit of a learning curve to playing a wizard well. We are going to put wizard here over in C. Sorcerers are arcane spellcasters. They serve primarily as offensive DPS, so they are nukers. They can just spam nuke spells over and over like fireballs, and their trees grant them enhancements around a specific energy, so you could focus on fire, you could focus on ice. Sorcerers cannot, like wizards, change their spells. Sorcerers pick spells, and they only are allowed to pick a few spells, but they get twice the spell points as wizards. Their main stat is charisma, so we're going to put this C. The next up is a rogue. Rogues are one of the only classes that can find and disable traps, so having a rogue is very useful. As a new player to DDO, you will learn that you really need to come up with a solution for traps. Many of the quests in DDO have lots of traps. Rogues get more skill points than any other class in DDO. Like I said, they're capable of finding and disabling traps. They also can open locked doors and locks. You can deal sneak attack damage on a rogue whenever you're behind an enemy. You gain stealth. They're really good at sneaking around and staying hidden. You gain a skill called evasion, which works if you're not wearing any armor or if you're wearing light armor in order to evade, and that allows them to dodge out of the way of an attack that is a reflex save. So if an enemy wizard threw a spell at you like a fireball, You could make an evasion roll and not take any damage or take half damage. They don't have the ability natively to cast spells. Your main stat is intelligence, and dexterity is also really important for you. The trap finding and disabling in Dungeons & Dragons Online is driven by intelligence. So if you're going to make a trap or you want to be intelligence-based, that pairs well for multi-classing and being like a rogue wizard or something like that. But there is a bit of finesse that goes into playing a rogue well, and they are not very survivable early on, especially with not a lot of gear. And it requires you to have sort of an economy in order to be able to afford all the potions and wands, and just getting used to the way that DDO plays. So unless you were in a group, soloing on a rogue might be difficult. So they are C, I would say, as far as for a new player friendliness. Now, our ranking system is not necessarily based on what is better. It's what's better for a new player. The next is a ranger. Rangers are inherently archers and they can dual wield. So all rangers have this ability, just as part of the way that the class is made. So if you want to be, they get favored enemies. They're really good at using bows. They're really good at dual wielding weapons. You are capable of doing stealth combat. Not as good as a rogue, but pretty well. You also get access to a variety of divine spells. Your primary stat for spell casting is wisdom. Depending on whether or not you went melee or ranged, you could do strength or dexterity. Constitution is always good for all the classes as well. Rangers are really solid, jack of all trade, really good for a new player. So we are going to rank them the same. They're right in the middle. The next up is Paladin. Paladins are basically fighters. They're holy warriors. Similar to clerics, although they're more like a warrior, and similar to warrior, although they're more like a cleric. They basically get their power from divine magic. In DDO, because it's based on older rules of Dungeons & Dragons Online, you have to be lawful good. A lot of your abilities come through your charisma score, so you want to have a decent charisma. But if you went melee or ranged, you would want to also keep your strength and dexterity. You know, if you went melee, you need strength. If you do ranged, you need dexterity. And then also you want to have constitution. And you want to have wisdom as well on a paladin because they are divine casters. So while they are extremely powerful and a great choice for a new player, you have to give a little bit of thought to how you spread out your ability points. Paladins are really good because they get some of the best saving throws in the game. They gain immunities to things like they're immune to fear, they're immune to all diseases, magical and non-magical. You can back up heal, you get lay hands, you also get access to some divine spells. And you have a bunch of you have auras that boost your power and aid people. Paladins make great defense. You can be a tank, you could do DPS, or you could heal. Paladins are amazing, a great choice for a new player. Very easy to jump in and win on a paladin. You do need to think about your abilities, but once you get those sorted out, they can just basically solo a lot of content. So excellent choice. Next up is Monk. Monks are combatants that perform attacks using an energy called Ki. And Ki is similar to spell points, except only monks have access to it. A monk, in order to use Ki, must be centered, meaning that you cannot be encumbered. You can only wield certain monk weapons, or you have to fight unarmed with your bare hands. You can wear no armor except for robes and monk outfits. If for some reason you become uncentered, you lose most of your bonuses. You can specialize through training feats and class enhancements in order to use other weapons, but typically they are limited. You do gain a variety of special feats, and you have extremely high dodge. At higher levels, your saving throws become some of the best in the game. You also can move pretty much faster than any other class as well. The main stat for you as a monk is wisdom, and that boosts your armor class and your key attacks and your tactical abilities. But you would also want to have strength, constitution, and dexterity. Monks are arguably the hardest class to play well in DDO. They are very niche, and also a lot of their damage got nerfed some years ago. So while people still play them, they are not a class I would recommend a new player to play. Probably they would be one of the least recommended classes that I would recommend. For a new player to DDO, they are not recommended at all. So the next class up are fighters. Fighters are warriors. They get a lot of feats. This allows them to specialize very well in martial combat. You can fight with single weapon. You can fight two-handed weapon. You can dual wield. You can do sword and board. It's up to you. You can tank. You can DPS melee. You can DPS ranged. They're extremely versatile fighters, and they are very good for new players to DDO because melee, especially melee characters do really well in DDO. As a fighter, you gain access to many feats that give you great offensive power. You also get some defensive abilities and the ability to do tactical maneuvers such as improved trip, improved thunder, stunning blow. Your primary attribute as a fighter would depend on what you were doing. So if you were doing melee, it would be strength. If you were doing ranged, it would be dexterity. You also want to have a lot of constitution as a fighter. The one issue with fighters, though, is that they're difficult to keep healed. So unless you were with a group, you would have to figure out ways to keep yourself healed. They do have some really good skills like Second Wind, but overall, for this list, I would say fighter is right in the middle. If you're new to DDO, you can't go wrong with a fighter. It's a great choice. However, it's not as good as a paladin. Next up is a druid. Druids are divine spellcasters who receive their power from nature as opposed to a deity. They gain a variety of offensive and defensive spells. They get crowd control. They get buffing. They get debuffing. You can fulfill all sorts of roles as a druid. You can tank as a bear. You could DPS, either melee or ranged. And you can do DPS nuking as a spellcaster, or you could be a healer. They're very versatile. You get a pet in the form of a wolf. You cannot use any metal armor or shields. The primary attribute of a druid is wisdom. And if you engage in melee, you want to also take strength. If you do ranged, you want to take dexterity. You also want to have a high constitution. We are going to rank them along with the other casters. They're just a little bit more complex. Next up is Cleric. Cleric are divine spellcasters. They specialize in healing, defensive spells, offensive spells. They do a lot of fire, a lot of light. They have physical damage. They have magical damage. They are a really great healer class. So clerics can do it all. You could make a tanky cleric. You could make a DPS melee cleric. You could make a DPS range cleric. You could make a DPS nuking spellcaster cleric. You could make a healer cleric. You could make a tanky healer cleric. Like, they're just extraordinarily versatile, allowing you to not only select a deity, but select a domain, and the domain buffs your abilities. Your primary attribute as a cleric is wisdom, but you also benefit from charisma. And then if you did melee damage, you would want strength. If you did range damage, you would want dexterity. But they are just really strong right now in DDO in 2023, and we are going to put them as an A tier next to Paladin. For a new player, they're just such a solid choice. The next up is the Bard. Bards are the true jack of all trades in Dungeons & Dragons. They can do a little bit of everything. They get a lot of skill points. They can cast spells. They can range. They can melee. They possess skills and they have special musical abilities that make your fellow party members stronger, and then you can debuff enemies. Your primary stat ability is Charisma. Your spell list contains a mix of both divine and arcane spells. You gain lots of skill points and have use magic device, allowing you to use most any item. They're often sought after in Dungeons and Dragons Online just because they are such powerful alt characters to buff and off heal. You can also do significant damage if you're spec'd out correctly as a melee or a ranged or a nuker. They're all around just very, very strong support characters. People love to party with them. Because of that, we're going to throw them into the C tier. They're very good, they're very strong, but they just not for a brand new player. The next up is Barbarian. Barbarians are warriors, like fighters, but they have special powers that they get that allow them to rage. And when you are raged, your melee DPS goes up, your hit points go up. They also get an innate damage reduction, so they take less damage. They cannot wear heavy armor. You also get access to uncanny dodge, which allows you to make reflex saving throws versus damage types. A lot of the Barbarian gear is keyed towards melee damage with two-handed weapons, but you don't have to be a two-handed fighter. You could also do two weapons or a single weapon. It would be up to you. You could also do a ranged weapon. Their rage, though, would only affect your strength and your constitution. So likely, if you wanted to be a raging barbarian, you would go melee. Most people go melee with a two-handed weapon. Very solid. They get a ton of hit points. They run really fast. They get a lot of built-in abilities to sort of soak damage, and they have an ability to heal damage. It's not as good as a paladin, but it's really good. And so what we would say is they are equal to the other. They're B tier. They're fighter, ranger, barbarian. They're all very solid choices for a new player to DDO. And that leaves us with our last, the Artificer. Artificer class must be purchased or unlocked. That's the only downside to this. You have to get 150 House Kenneth favor on a single character to unlock Artificer, or buy Artificer in the DDO store. Artificers are hands down probably one of the best classes in DDO, no matter what you're doing. Artificers combine magic with weapons, technology, and skills. They get a lot of skill points. They get a pet in the form of a robotic dog that will go with them on their adventures. You get access to arcane spells. You have the ability to find and remove traps. You are a jack of all trade. You can heal, you can spellcast, you can very effectively range, you can very effectively melee, you can open locks. Artificers are the only class in the game that can use rune arms, unless you go into epics and take the tree that allows you to use rune arms. Primarily, your attribute is intelligence. That's what your spellcasting is, so it pairs up well if you want to take levels in Wizard or levels in Rogue. But I believe that they are hands down the best class for a new player. If you are brand new and you don't have access to it and you don't want to spend the money to buy it, you'd be really well served by doing the A tiers, either a Cleric or a Paladin. But once you get that Artificer unlocked, I highly recommend it. Or if you're new to DDO and you did buy it, they are fantastic. Another way to optimize Artificer is to make your race Warforged, and that would allow you to take advantage of all the built-in healing in Artificer, which basically makes you unkillable. So you could be an Artificer tank, you could be Artificer melee DPS, Artificer range DPS, Artificer nuker spellcaster DPS, you could be a healer. Depending on what your role is, they have access to throw vials of heals on regular characters. They also have an aura that would heal machine characters. They're just all around amazing in Dungeons and Dragons Online. So that's my list. Now, obviously, this is subjective and this will change. This is as of Q4 2023. And it's very difficult to rank them this way. Somebody might argue that Paladin actually should be S tier. And that is a great argument too. I sort of agree. Like, I don't think you can go wrong with a Paladin, but the thing from my perspective that pushes the Artificer slightly ahead of the Paladin is the fact that they can find and remove traps, open locks, and they get a pet to pull levers and help them out. It's just amazing. They are literally like the best. And if you are doing Hardcore League, Artificer is a fantastic choice. I hope you guys enjoyed that list, and I'm going to be making more. We will probably do one of these for race, and we'll probably do one of these for... I hope you guys have a good one, and I'll catch you later.